Hello, it's Kathy Schmitz. Thank you for joining me again for the May design in my One Stitch at a Time club. And this month I stitched up the design two different ways. Actually, I didn't. My mom stitched this one up, and she just used a very simple stem stitch, some running stitches, and French knots, and just one color of thread. It's a beautiful variegated Baldani. So it does have some nice changes of color within that thread, which is really nice. And the color is listed on the pattern. So then I went ahead and I stitched it up another way. I wanted to give it a little more oomph. So I went ahead and made some more detailing on it. Okay, what I did on this, I did a satin stitch for the berries, and I did a fishbone stitch for the leaves. The little beak is a satin stitch. I filled in the vest with a chain stitch. They're just running right next to each other. And then for the pants and the scarf, I filled them in with a stem stitch right next to each other. Just filled it in there. There's little French knot buttons, and the brim of the hat is a stem stitch, and then the top of the hat is actually a basket weave, which might be kind of hard to see there, but maybe you can tell on that. And then I also did the same simple little running stitches for the detail on the bird. So I know I've gone over some of these stitches before. One thing I really wanted to show or go into more depth with on this video is different ways to do berries. Now, my berries don't normally look like this. I'm very proud of these berries. They look really, really good. Part of that is because I used a trick that my mom showed me that I want to show you. So what you do is you take Fusible web, and you're going to trace all the circles you need. And on this pattern, I think there's 27, but I'm not sure. So you trace all your little circles onto Fusible web. You iron that onto a piece of fabric that goes with the color of floss that you're going to use. And in this case, I'm using DMC for the berries because I wanted it to be a solid color. I do love the variation you get with the Baldani, but in the berries, I tried it and it kind of cut it. So it was like, here's one color, then here's one color, and here's one color. And I didn't like that so much. I think it would have been different if I had gone around and around and around. So I went ahead and did DMC for these berries, and that DMC thread is also on the pattern. And I found just a scrap of fabric that I had. So I'll go ahead and show you what I did. What you do is, and I love these are micro serrated Kai scissors. And they just grip the fabric and make it really easy when you're cutting small shapes. And I do have these on my website. Kai is my favorite brand. I think that's how you say it. It's Kai. So we're just going to cut out the little circles like that. So I'm just going to use this one for now. And then what we're going to do is, once you have all your circles cut out, I didn't even cut that out. Very good circle, did I? But it will do for now. You're going to take the pattern so that you've downloaded the pattern, and instead of printing it on regular paper, I like to print it on the paper side of freezer paper. This is the back side. I don't know if you can see, it's shiny. That's the wax side. So once it's printed onto the freezer paper, I can iron that wax side to my fabric. And now they're stuck together. They don't go anywhere. And it makes tracing so much easier. And sometimes it helps too, this is a hint. If it's kind of hard to see through the fabric, it's helpful if you make the room darker. So I'm going to turn that light off. I'm going to pull those blinds a little bit. Oop, sorry, bump the camera while I'm at it. But you can see that helps make the design show up a little bit better. So normally I would trace with a pilot friction pen, but I also want to put on these round berries. So if I trace it and then iron these berries on, my design is going to disappear because this disappears with the heat of an iron. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my circles in place. I'll cut out another one, see if I can do a little better job cutting a circle than this last one. And they do stick a little bit, so they will kind of stay in place a little bit until you get it to the ironing board. So once you get all of those where you want them, then you gingerly take it to the ironing surface and you press those in place. Once they're pressed into place, then you can go in and go ahead and trace your design. I do a little kind of a sketchy line like that. Sketch, 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 and then you can see there's the line. I'll turn this light back on so you can see. Like that. So that's the order you want to do it if you're going to use these. The nice thing about them is they're going to be ironed on and you satin stitch right over the top of them. And so you already have this really perfect circle. And if your threads aren't right next to each other, just the red of this shows through, so you don't even notice it as much if your stitches aren't perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and iron some of these in place, and then I'll show you some other ways that you could choose to fill those in if you'd like, and I'll also go over the satin stitch. Now I have the design traced on, and I have these berries that I'm going to use with the fabric. Forgot to do the stems there. They're ironed in place, so they're not going anywhere. And so I will show you how to satin stitch over that. But I also wanted to show you some other ways that you could fill that in if you wanted. And one of them is by using a colored pencil. Just a regular old colored pencil. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You just want to use one that will match the thread that you're going to use. And this is pretty close, so this is what I'll use. And I would just start by going kind of in a circle fairly light. And then you can start going darker and darker, depending on how dark you want it. Now, if you don't want to fuse fabric down, you can also just color it in and then satin stitch over it if you want. This helps with the threads, so that if they're not touching, you just see this red below. But I think it also looks really cute just colored in red. Like that. Do another one here. It's just a really easy way to fill in an area. And as you can see, it's probably much faster than satin stitching that area. And I'll finish up with this one. Okay, so when you're using a colored pencil, if I were to just start stitching right now, my hand on here is going to rub that color off. So what you do need to do is fix it. And I like to use this. It's Jacquard Textile 100 Colorless Extender. And I bought this one on Amazon. They have them at your craft store like Michael's and things like that. So I can't recall how much it was. I don't think it was very expensive, and it will last forever and ever. So if you have a large area, you can water it down. I'm just going to go ahead and use it as it is. I like to use a brush that's kind of stiff, a little bit stiffy. And you don't need much, and you're just going to go over the area that you colored. And this, once this is dried, this will set the color. And I don't know if you noticed, but my freezer paper is still on the back. And that's what makes coloring on the fabric so much easier. The fabric isn't wiggling around. And even while I'm painting on here, I'm just leaving that freezer paper on there. And then once I finish doing this, I can pull that freezer paper off. And we'll let this completely dry. And then I'll show you how you can finish stitching these circles up. they were a little bit lighter than what I was hoping for, but you can always go back in and add another color if you want, but I think these will be fine. Okay, we'll let that dry and then we'll start stitching. I am not a big hoop user, but I have trained myself to use a hoop on certain stitches, and a satin stitch is definitely one that works out better if I am using a hoop. It's my own personal experience. So these I'm going to stitch using the DMC thread. When you're using a DMC or another multi-strand floss, you want to pull one strand out at a time. Even if you're using 2 or 3, you're always going to pull one strand out at a time. And by doing that, it keeps them from twisting up so much while you're stitching. And as you can see, the easiest way to do it is just to pinch it lightly and pull one at a time while you're still pinching. And now the rest aren't tangled up. They're just ready for later. I like to use a size 7 embroidery needle, and I have these on my website. Now I'm all ready to do the stem stitch. So I'm going to bring my needle up on one of the edges. And if you want to just kind of test, you can see how big you should take it. If I take it just a little stitch, it's gonna not be a circle. It's gonna be a funny oblong thing. So you can kind of tell by, okay, where am I just barely gonna be covering that edge of that fabric? About right there. And you bring the needle down just right on the outside of the fabric. I found it's helpful too if I do the, up and down, poke and pull to get them looking really, really nice, rather than going down and then pulling my needle up on the other side like that. It takes a little bit longer, but I think the results are worth it. And actually, I kind of got into a rhythm where it didn't take as long as I thought it was going to, so it was worth it. And by having this little piece of fabric under there, it also adds a little bit more dimension, so it makes the berry sit up a little bit more off the fabric, which is nice. Gives it a little more depth. So there you can see how that's coming along, and it's looking pretty good. And another odd thing I noticed, because some of mine, you could tell if my threads got twisted a little bit, it just wasn't laying super, super flat. And just out of, trial and error, one thing I thought I'd give it a little try was after I was all done with the berry, I just kind of took my finger and gently rubbed it over the stitches. And it kind of gave it a nice little finish. So you can kind of see I missed a little area there. So I'm just going to go back and sneak a stitch there. So, I mean, it looks pretty good, but I noticed, like, if I just kind of rub my finger over it, it kind of, I don't know if it kind of loosens the threads up a little bit, and it made it look even better than it really was. So just another little way of cheating, I guess. So I'm going to now do just a really simple stem stitch around the ones that we colored in. So I like to take about 1/8 of an inch, pretty small, and they're going to come up right in that same hole as where you just took your previous stitch. And when you're going around a circle, I like to keep my thread carried on the outside of the circle. Otherwise, the stitches kind of fall in, and I want them to really stay on the outside. And this is a nice simple way of getting that same look of a solid berry without quite so much work. By doing that, by giving it a little stem stitch around the outside, instead of it being a little bit of a fuzzy line, it makes it really nice and sharp like that. Another thing that you could do is do that same thing, just a stem stitch, but go around these fused pieces. Now in this case, I would carry the thread on the inside, and since the stitches will kind of fall in a little bit, they actually fall in over the edge of the fabric and hold it in place a little bit. This wouldn't be something I would do on a quilt or something that was going to be washed, because it's not really, you know, stitching through that fabric to hold it in place, but just for a little, whatever this is going to be, it's fine. And this also just kind of finishes it off nicely if you don't want to do a satin stitch. So now you can see how that looks. That looks kind of nice too. I like that. I forgot to mention that I switched back to the Baldani red. This is just one strand of the 12 weight. Another option for filling these berries in is to fill them in with the stem stitch. So you're going to stitch all the way around just like we did on those other two. We're just going to continue stitching around and around and around until we reach the center and fill the berry in. And this is also how we do his shorts or his pants and his scarf. I just went around the outside and then filled them in. Now with let me show you on here though, because there's different ways you can do it. So instead of going around and around and around, I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You can see they all end at the edge of the scarf. And same with the pants. I did an outline around it, and then I just did straight lines like that. Okay, so now I'm starting the second row. I'm kind of doing this fast so my stitches aren't as small as they probably should be for such a small little area. And no one will ever know if you just, you know, take some extra stitches if you see some bare spots that you want a little bit more thread to cover. And now that's filled in with just a stem stitch going around and around and around. Another stitch that I like to use when I'm filling in a berry or something that's round is the woven wheel. And you just need to have an odd number of spokes. So I've drawn 7 spokes on these berries. And when you start, since you're going to have a knot in your thread, you don't want to pull that up in the center because so many of them are coming down into that same center hole. You'd be pulling your thread through a knot. So I would start on the outside and then make your spokes that way. And my spokes probably aren't quite as even around as they could be, but hey, it works. Okay, so once you have your spokes all in place, like this, like I got over a little bit, I'm going to bring my needle up really right near the center, like that. Now the first spoke I'm going to go over, and the next spoke I'm going to go under. And you just alternate like that. And sometimes it's helpful to use the eye end of your needle because it's not pointy, so you're not going to accidentally pick up fabric. So we're just going to continue to go over, under, and just keep building it up all the way around. And you can pull this tight, which kind of makes it bunch up and really has a lot more dimension to it. I tend to just like to keep them flat so I don't pull too hard. And you just keep going until you don't see the spokes any longer. And I'm almost done with this one, I think. There you go. Just pull the needle down. So on this bird, I filled in his vest with a chain stitch. So I'll show you how to do that. The first thing you'll want to do is do a simple stem stitch around the outside edges, and then bring your needle up just at one end. And I just did these running up, down, up, down, up, down. Kind of like the knit on a vest. So you pull your needle up in the corner, you're going to carry your thread up and around, put your needle down in that same hole. And I like small stitches like that. It's maybe 1/8, maybe a little bit bigger than 1/8. And you carry your thread under the needle and pull your thread away from you. And now we're going to repeat that same thing. So we're going to loop that thread up around. I'm going to take the needle down inside of that loop, right where it came up before, and take another 1/8 of an inch. The thread goes under the needle and pull it away from you. Now I have 2. And you just continue till you get to the top, then you turn around and you're going to do a chain stitch back to the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to just move over a little bit and come back the other direction. And this is where it's kind of fun to see the variation in the thread too. And you could just fill the whole thing in, just like that. So it is in the front here, and then it's also just a little bit in the back, and that's the chain. Now for the scarf and the pants, I went over that. That's just a stem stitch that's filled in. So first you take an outline around it, and then you fill it in. So the leaves on this one are they're just a very simple stem stitch all the way around, and that works just fine. On this one, I went ahead and did the fishbone stitch. So I'll show you how to do that on here. One thing I think's kind of helpful is to have a center line. You don't have to, but it's kind of helpful for me. And again, I'm going to use a hoop with this, which you don't need to, but on certain stitches, I do find it helpful. So you start at the very tip, and I'm going to come down maybe 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to come up on one side of that tip, following the line that's drawn. Bring the needle down on the other side of this center line and a little bit below where this first stitch ended. Now bring the needle up on the other side of the center tip, again on the same side, on the drawn line, and we're going to cross over the center line. So these just kind of cross over each other in the very, very center, but you don't really see the cross. You just see almost like a little vein when it's all stitched. And you just alternate sides. And always pull your needle up right on the drawn line of the leaf. And then once you get going at it, you can just put the needle down here, bring the needle up there. And that goes faster that way. So down and up. Down and up. And as you can see, it's kind of making a nice little vein down the center of the leaf. And this is a nice, easy way to fill a leaf in too. So we just continue that all the way down to the bottom till we run out of space. I could be taking a little more time with this. They're not turning out quite as nice as the ones where I really take my time. But it still works. So there's a little leaf like that. The front of his vest has 5 little gold buttons. So the buttons are a French knot, and you're going to take the needle up right where the button should be on the outside of the little vest. I'm going to wrap it 2 times around the needle. I'm kind of holding it just lightly with that finger so they don't slip off there. And I'm going to put the needle down really close to where I came up. Now I can let go of that. I'm going to slide those wraps down to the fabric, hold them in place with my thumb and my finger on the back, and then pull the needle through. And there's a French knot. So I'll do one more here. Whoopsie. I didn't draw them on here, so I'm kind of eyeballing it. We're going to go 1, 2, put the needle down, slide those wraps to the fabric, gently pull it. You don't want to pull it too tight because you want to be able to pull the needle through, but you don't want it to be too loose also. And there's another little button. And that's how you make a little French knot. For his hat, the brim is just a filled in stem stitch. So I'm just going to go around the outside and then back and forth, back and forth. But for the top part of it, I'm going to do an outline of the hat using a stem stitch. And then I'm going to take straight lines from the top to the bottom. These are going to be pretty close, like 1/16 of an inch. Not touching, but pretty close, like this. Because I wanted this to look kind of like a straw hat, like it's woven. Of course, you don't have to do this. You could just fill it in with a stem stitch if you want. But I think these little basket weaves are pretty fun. Okay, so now we have the one direction done. Now we're going to come back up. I'm going to start in this little corner here. And again, it's a little easier if you take the eye of your needle because it won't pick up the threads. And you're just going to weave that over, under, and take the needle down on the other side. And then pull the needle up, and we'll come back the other way. So I'll do one more. I could probably do 4, but I'm just going to do 3. Kind of leave it as a loose weave hat. So I'm going to go over. There we go. Okay, that's the last row for that. You kind of move your rows around a little bit with your needle. Adjust them as needed. And there you have the little woven top of his hat. For his beak, it's going to be a satin stitch. And what I would recommend doing is starting at the base of the triangle that's closest to his body, the fat end, this end. And you could also use a colored pencil or something to color that in first, so that if your stitches aren't perfect, you're not going to see the fabric below. But this is pretty small, so it's a lot easier to kind of fill that area in. And let's see if that's a pointy enough. Oh, maybe one tiny little bit. Going over just like one thread to make it more pointy. There's his little beak. For the bird's body, you're just going to use a stem stitch to outline it. And then the little dashed lines are just little running lines, running stitches or seed stitches. This isn't the color that I actually used in my finished one, but it's one that I had in a needle, so I thought I'd just use this instead. It shows up really well to show you. So that's how simple those little lines are to stitch. And then I wanted to show you could do a French knot for the eye, but what I have been doing lately that I kind of like is just a little diagonal line one direction. It's kind of the top of his eye. And then another little one kind of goes into that a little bit. That's the bottom of his eye. That looks like his eyeball. All right, and I think that covers most of the stitches. And here's this one finished again. I really am enjoying that one. This is done on the Moda Crackle. This is done on the Moda Mochi Linen, which I have both of those on my website. Love this. I love them both. Right now I'm just kind of enamored with this, even though it's a little harder to see through to trace. This one's much easier to see through to trace. And I do like that the crackle gives it a little bit of texture on the background. So whichever way you decide to stitch these up, please share a picture. I'd love to see it. You can post it on Facebook or Instagram and tag me so I can see it and see what you're up to. Thanks so much. We'll see you next month.